Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's session. My name is Elizabeth Orme. I'm the founder and CEO of Creatively Focused. Creatively Focused is an educational technology company focused on increasing the retention rate of special educators. Today, I'm really excited to have a panel with me of wonderful experts in the area of product and technology. So I'm going to actually have them introduce themselves. Oh, look at that. You're right.
Totally planned that.
And so I'm going to have you each introduce yourselves, name what you do, where you work, and something that's exciting about Twin Cities Startup Week this week for you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Daryl Vavrichek. It's sort of like Harry Potter where the pictures come alive. That's what I'm trying to do right here. I am the Director of Customer Success at Creatively Focused. And what was that?
What excites you about Twin Cities Startup Week?
I think as I've been watching the sessions this week and seeing the creativity that's out there and the clear out of the box thinking and finding these unique solutions to things that we've been probably pondering for a long time. It's been cool to really watch and see how people are approaching that.
Thanks, Daryl.
I'm Paul Johansen. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at EdTech. We're a K-12 digital curriculum and assessments company. And I'm just really excited about how powerful this community is here in the Twin Cities area. I'm super impressed at how much activity there is. You just don't hear about it every day, and so to see it is just really an amazing thing.
Hi, I'm Becky Vavrichek. I'm the VP of Product Development, and I'm just really excited to not have feedback from the speaker. I'm really excited because besides what they said as well, it's those fun like nuggets and takeaways that you get that you wouldn't get on a day-to-day basis. And it's being offered in a different variety of social settings, networking, hybrid, virtual, in-person, different ways just to network and meet other people.
Thank you, everyone. So our agenda for today is to really look at some critical questions when it comes to customer or user voice. And what does that mean for scaling a product? And what does that mean for innovation within your company? And so we're going to look at 4 key components. First, we're going to look at determining your proximity to a user or customer, evaluating your listening styles, expressing value to users, and then sharing success. So to get started, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to reflect for a minute. When you look at these points up here, I want you to try to think of one concrete way that your company or yourself, that you're doing this with your customers, right? So 1, are you really close to them? How do you know that? 2, are you really listening through different listening styles? What does that look like? 3, are you showing them value? How? And 4, are you sharing in success? And again, what does that look like? So using the most visual part of your brain right now, I want you to really think and hear those conversations happening in your head. What do they sound like with your team? What do they look like? What do people's faces look like in them? Are they confused? Are they happy? And we have a really small group, but man, would I love for one person to give me one thing that they're thinking about. Which one is sticking out to you right now? Yes, Mark.
It's the nonverbal. What are they doing? What is their facial expression during the, in my case, educational experience?
Great, those nonverbals. So you can see the conversation happening and you can see their faces. Great. Any others feel like sharing? People from my own team can share too. Okay, so before we move forward, Before we move forward, I'd like you to now think of one question that you have. What is one question you hope to hear about today? And then there will be time at the end. If you don't hear the answer to that question, or if you don't hear information on that, we'll have some time for you to be able to ask that question. Oops, wrong way. So let's get started. So in talking with our wonderful panelists, we talked a little bit about not just how to answer some of these questions, but from the seats that we sit in within our organization, how do we approach these questions? So today we're starting out with that very first piece, which is determining the proximity to the user, right? One of the questions that we face when we're kind of identifying, like, are we close enough to them or not, is to ask the question, is the problem you're solving really a problem for educators, right? And so in the EdTech space, that's what we're thinking a lot about. Are we close enough to the problem? Do we really know that that's the problem? And Becky, I think that you have, you know, from the product development area, some good insight in terms of how we've thought about this question. I'd love to hear how you're addressing this question. This mic is too close to the speaker. You want to stand and walk around?
Oh, he's yeah, so that is the core focus of my role, is how do I solve those problems for our customers? And I'm gonna just speak really loud because that's maybe not, is it good? Okay,
So,
okay.
I'll keep it here. Sorry.
So creatively focused, when it first started, really focused on a professional services model and coming in and taking a look at how does products then come and be part of that. And so we had a direct line to the insight of our customers, but also because of the professional services, we had internal customers. So we were able then to be able to make sure we were solving those problems day in and day out. But what we had to start looking at is realizing, how are we solving those? And is it with a human? Is it with technology? Is it with a combination of both? And that's really when we started to take a look at reflecting and auditing where we are going to look for that. And then we carried out some other things that I know others can share too in their experiences. But what we were able to identify is that we are truly solving the problems because we are providing that opportunity of that day-to-day and that direct line of solutioning.
What were some of those strategies you used during that time to be able to, you know, hear everything that we were hearing, right? We had, I mean, hundreds of educators telling us what their problems were. What were some strategies that you used to really prioritize what you were hearing?
I think for that piece is we did a lot of stuff. We did a lot of feedback sessions. We did a lot of interviews and being able to have a variety of people that we were speaking with. So we were asking those questions and actively listening to what their responses were, and or sometimes they come with their own solutions. And so we were turning it around to see what is the problem that, and pain points that they are then offering the solution to. So a lot, almost simplistic, a lot of active listening.
And tell me more, that human piece and the technology piece. Tell me about that process. What did you hear from them in terms of what needed to be a human or could be technology? Was it always right from the educator? Did you hear, oh, it has to be human, so we're going to keep doing it through humans, or what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes back to that same thing of sometimes people have that solution for themselves. And so looking at kind of providing that right time to potentially push in and offer that solution in a different view to see how they can or would react to that piece. Sometimes you think it could be a human, but really that human element is maybe because they're connecting on a certain feeling. So how can then something else provide that same feeling of success or building their expertise, or that high five from someone? You can see how does that feel in a different way.
So something that I saw Becky do through her work in this really focused on what many of you may have heard of as an empathy map, or thinking about who is our customer, who is the user, what is the user journey, what do their days look like, and that development of kind of getting close to the person through the services that were being provided, but then also filling in the gaps of what maybe we weren't seeing because we were so close, right? And so there were times when you can be too close, right? I was the special educator, so there are times when I have to step back and say, For a minute, I'm going to pretend that I wasn't that person, and I'm going to have my team take over to really understand today's special educator. So proximity, I think, is just such an extraordinarily important piece of understanding what is my proximity to the user. And is it always helpful, or is it sometimes that I need to take a step back or have another team come in and provide a different lens in that? So thank you, Becky, for sharing that piece. So you mentioned in that piece that you had a variety of ways of being able to get the information, interviews, doing surveys, different ways to gain that feedback. And Paul, I know that you have a lot of experience in this area from that CTO lens as well. How does Edmentum look at gaining that user feedback, and what does it do for you then in terms of your product development?
Yeah, I mean, we have one of our kind of informal mantras at Edmentum is called educator first. And really that at the core of that, what it means is that we're listening to our teachers and deeply understanding what it is that our teachers need. And so we do that through a variety of ways. We do a lot of on-site or virtual visits. We do surveys as well. We really focus heavily on NPS, and not just the quantitative score, but ensuring that we're asking qualitative questions as well, so that we can really get a deep correlation and understanding from that perspective. When you think about it from a user experience perspective, we do every design that we work through. We're using different research sessions, some of them formal, some of them informal, to test that design, and most importantly, get it from teachers and students to make sure that we're understanding what is easy, what's not easy, where they'll struggle, and be able to adapt those designs and move forward as well.
So you mentioned one term yesterday that I'm excited about just because it sounds fun. And Paul talked about listening tours. Tell me a little bit more about what listening tours look like at Edmentum.
Yeah, so one story about a listening tour is in 2016, we set out to build a new product that's now called ExactPath. We didn't know what it was going to be called then. And we identified 50 different customer types that we wanted to be able to talk to. So large districts, small district, rural districts. We wanted to talk to teachers. We wanted to talk to administrators. We wanted to talk to principals. And so we set out literally on this listening tour and kind of traveled across the country and did all sorts of different visits. There were different kind of caravans or groups of us that would go around. And one of the really interesting things that came out of that listening tour was, and it really relates to what Becky was just talking about, was when we went out, we were under the assumption that a teacher is always going to know best for their students what they need. The teacher will have the answer. So we set off on that journey and started assuming that there was going to be a big human factor as to how this new product, which was elementary intervention. And as we talked to more and more teachers, one of the things that we would end kind of each listening tour session was basically a question that's something like, tell me about any other problems you have when it comes to elementary intervention for your students. And all of a sudden we started to hear a theme where teachers would come back to us and say, I have the results of these benchmarks that my kids have to take every single year, whether it's NWEA or it's on STAR, and I don't know what to do with them. So if you could tell me what to do with the results of these assessments, that would be really helpful. And so we started to hear that same theme over and over. So we went into the listening tour with the assumption that the teacher really had the best idea of where that student should be. And ultimately what we heard through asking that question was the teacher saying, I have this information, but I don't actually really know how to take that information and put it into action. And so that's exactly, eventually how ExactPath came to be, was taking the results of the assessment that the students already taken and making the results of that more than just assessment for the sake of assessment, but being able to put it into action, giving a learning path that's adapted to a student as well as a teacher to understand for where a student is at. Maybe they're a fifth grader, but they're struggling with math, so they need a third grade math skill. They're really good at ELA and they need a sixth grade writing skill. So that's what ExactPath does, is translates those assessment results into a path, and that would have, without the listening tour, without kind of asking a more appropriate question, where ExactPath went to, would really never complete.
So it sounds like in a listening tour, being open-minded and kind of that like growth mindset is a must.
Yeah, and I think that's, absolutely. I think it's the hardest part, right? Because you also go in with a bias because there's things you want. You have ideas that you think are going to work. You have predetermined conceptions about how the product should work. And so you can certainly find yourself driving the conversations to try to get the answers you want. I think for all of us, that's a challenge, whether you're someone like you who is actually a practitioner and sitting in that chair and knew how it worked, or somebody else who's looking at it from the outside and thinking you have to figure it out, regardless of what perspective you're coming from. Really making sure that you're being attentive and truly listening to what's being told, rather than trying to pick out the pieces that best fit the story you want to tell.
So one thing I know that those of you that work in education are thinking, because I know I've thought it before, is how are we going to ask teachers and administrators to spend even more time with us, right? Like, we know feedback is critical. We know what it can mean for future development of the things that we're doing, and we're really eager to get it. What we also know is that the number one factor in their day is I don't have enough time, right? And so I'm going to transition this question over to you, Daryl, because as the director of success here, we get to this question of, do our users know that feedback is critical to product development? How do they interpret feedback? How do we actually get them to say yes to talking to us?
Persistence. That's an element. I mean, so there's two schools of thought with that. One, when a purchase is made with us, and I know with Admentum, a team swarms in and says, how can we help? How can we help? Right? And that's set up and that implementation. In that moment, what the methodology for creatively focused truly is going in and asking a lot of questions. Asking questions to find out the why, build the why, find out more. We know how our product works. We know how to teach the click. What we really strive for is getting to that spot of what is it that's going to help change the behavior and help you be more efficient, be more effective, and do the things that you want to do to get to that time element. And when they're sharing that, and when we're asking the second and the third layer of questions, that's valuable feedback. That's information. And I use the word conduit a lot in the sense that in my role, being customer facing quite a bit, I then always am cognizant, or anybody on my team is always cognizant of, is that good information for product? Would Becky want to know that these were the things that we were hearing here or there, right? And then taking that to marketing. So an internal feedback loop is crucial for anybody out in the field, sales included. The other aspect of that is genuine, hey, how are we doing? Just flat out asking, are we meeting your needs? Are we getting you to what you thought was the finish line? And then also in that implementation, having those reflection points, putting that moment out there for the team, anybody involved, all from sales to just customer success, etc., and the key stakeholders, and holding a form of reflection and celebration. Like you mentioned, high fives, right? That's one of my biggest things. What are we going to high five about when we're done with this purchase or with this product, with this school year? It's setting those goals and then making sure to reflecting back. That is valuable feedback as well. So long term, and then anytime you talk, we discuss it.
So what's something that's happened recently for you where you've got a customer who's going to be open at any time to give you feedback? Like, how did you get there? Right? Because you have a couple.
Yeah. I have a buddy in Hibbing, Minnesota right now that is a direct line of conversation. And two parts of that. One, he felt heard. He feels heard now in the sense that he was at a spot. He knew he wanted to do some things, and we just spent some time and talked. And they made a purchase. They have access 3, and we spent a whole school year trying some things. There wasn't pressure. We piloted through it, and I built emotional equity with him to where there's a clear line of, Daryl, what do you think, before he's trying something? And there's strategy in that when you think about district success and you think about a consultative approach, but getting a customer to be in a spot where they value you and their decisions moving forward, that's the sweet spot. And then that leads business to renewal, things of that nature too. So it really is just hearing and listening and asking those questions early on, and that customer then feels valued.
So Daryl, you made me think of something because, you know, in a lot of cases, you know, you've kind of made it in terms of being able to get that customer feedback when you have somebody asking you, what do you think, right? The relationship is there, the trust is there. And in other cases, we also need to then just kind of be quiet and see what they're coming up with for themselves. And so I'm thinking of an example here that maybe I'll have Becky kind of start speaking to. And it brings us into this last question of, you know, are your users selling for you? Are they going out and doing sales? Absolutely not. However, what you know is helpful in a sale is when you're able to say, hey, so-and-so in X school district over here is currently working with us and I know they'd be happy to connect with you, right? Or, you know, we can tell you about a use study that we just had happening over here. So ultimately, of course, you want that feedback to be able to lead there. And Becky and I were having a conversation the other day that made me really think quite a bit about those moments when you're receiving feedback that you're not directly asking for it, but the feedback you're receiving is critical to your next steps. And so in this case, specifically to how the district was starting to see the product working for them and removing their roadblocks. Tell me a little bit about that experience that you had the other day. Or that actually I'm gonna go from Becky to Daryl because I wanna hear your VP of product lens on this. And then I wanna hear your director of success lens as well.
Okay, I'm gonna set the scene for you for this story, and then we love to tell stories. So what was happening is we got feedback overall. Daryl was working with a customer and he just wanted to share, like he said, he's like, is this important for product to know? And so he's sharing with me that he's speaking with someone and they were processing out loud, essentially removing their own barriers. And he was really excited about it because he was being able to kind of nudge him with the help of the person personally nudging themselves to move forward with the buy-in and the implementation and stuff. What I was hearing from the product lens was Access 3 wasn't a barrier. Access 3 was helping him remove some preconceived notions and barriers of his own to then move forward. And so for me right there, that was a like indirect form of feedback that allowed me to know what we aim to do with Access 3 being something that isn't another thing, but it is a complementary thing in that person's life that was happening just in one conversation.
No, well said. At the risk of mansplaining, I think the goal with this was the behavior change was self-inflicted for him in the sense that he saw the value of what we were offering and talking about. And in that moment, I actually was quiet. I know that's hard to believe, but I listened and heard and watched him again self-process and what it was again from a product lens and a consultative lens or a customer success element was giving that customer a moment to feel comfortable and think through the pieces. I have all the answers all the time and I'm excited to share them or how it works or where we could do this or that. But when the customer can get to their own conclusion, that's way more valuable than anything I would have said in that moment.
So right there, we saw the connection between looking from a success end and a product end. And Paul, I'm going to circle back to you because what I want to hear a little bit more about is when things are really working, right? What impact is that having for you as a CTO beyond the business advantage of, yes, our product is working? There are ways that you need to kind of capitalize on those great testimonials, right? Internally and externally. So what does that look like for you? What do you consider when you get kind of that great feedback happening?
Yeah, I think one of the real advantages of that great feedback is the way you can use it internally with your teams. Hearing great things from customers and that the things that engineers are building are having an impact on customers is incredibly powerful. Right? It engages our engineers at a different level. It gives them a level of satisfaction in terms of what they're doing. It's no longer just kind of taking a story off the board and getting it done, that they can really see and feel that the work that they put in, the feature that they built, the data that they're providing to an educator is actually having an impact for that educator or for that student. So we found, again, kind of as part of this educator first mantra that they find that there is, definitely has fantastic outcomes from a business perspective, from a success perspective, how our products are doing, but also fantastic outcomes internally in terms of how it drives the culture, how it drives engagement, how it drives just satisfaction of all the teams, the engineering team and other teams in the organization too, of what they're doing, and really using that, it's kind of the highest level of praise is getting that customer feedback and circling that back to the team. So really using that to help drive the culture as well.
Tell me a little bit about that external piece. Then you talked about the educator first network that you have. What does that do externally for you when you have a really great success with the customer, or you have, a great new launch that happens?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I think that's another thing that just continually builds on itself, right? There's a lot of formal research and formal case studies we do, but the informal great stories are the ones that make such a great impact. There's something in a neighboring district, there's something that someone's just posting on social media, or being able to talk, especially when you talk about how do you incentivize people to provide you feedback, being able to tell them the story of, hey, this teacher provided this feedback on how to do this report or how to build this functionality, and we put it in the product, and it's part of it. So I think being able to relay those stories of how the feedback really matters and finds its way into the product, finds its way into the solutions that we're building, it's also very powerful.
In a funny way, just across the stories, what I was just thinking was that in a strange way, you're connecting people without them really knowing that you're connecting them, right? Like you're providing a feeling of connection. Like that person over there who I can make some assumptions has a day that's like mine, feels this way about this product, and therefore maybe I might feel that way as well, right? So to me, I can't help myself as a psychology major. My brain goes to that part of the brain, my brain goes to that part of the brain that says, what is this actually doing for me when I'm hearing that a teacher just like me was providing this feedback and it's now in this product, right? So it goes back to that piece of we're providing them with an opportunity to feel valued, that their journey and their story and their bio is truly what we're working off of. So in my final question to the group today, I want you to really sit in your head as Director of Success, CTO, VP of Product Development. What impact does it have when you can say with 100% confidence, the product that is being put in teachers' hands right now is going to help them? What does it mean for you in your seat if you're hearing that feedback and you're feeling that feedback? What implications does that have? What are your next steps after hearing that? Besides high-fiving.
Oh man, now you took my answer. I mean, really, it's it is celebrating it, right? Ensuring kind of spreading the word, making a case out of it. Do we have time for another quick story?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was one of our customers is near El Paso, a school district called Socorro, which has very a lot of poverty, a lot of diversity, a lot of challenges. And so we were sitting with one of the teachers in Socorro. Her name is Mrs. Laguna. And again, kind of having a feedback session about reporting in our courseware product. And she was talking about, she's one of those teachers that we just love because she cares about her kids so much. And so she was telling us, she's like, every week I print out 600 reports so that I can walk and sit down with the student and go through it. She's like, so I stay after, and it usually takes me, 2 of the nights every week. I spend about 4 hours just printing out these reports. And then she was going to go through every one of the reports. And because she's worried that it's going to demotivate her student, she'll black out the grade on there if they have a grade that's not a great grade, because she doesn't want them to get demotivated. Maybe they're only at a C or a D. And so she would spend 8 to 10 hours a week printing out these reports to try to connect with her students. And so it's one of my favorite feedback stories was, this is how we have this now batch reporting functionality in that product that allows you to just select all your students, say, print all of these reports, and it also has a filter to say whether or not to show the grade or not. And so we often refer to Mrs. Laguna, but being able to solve that for her and give her back 12 hours every day and then know that there's probably 100,000 other educators like her that use our product. You know, those kind of stories are great. Really deep personal satisfaction, but also where the team can just connect and understand how something so simple, and when you look back at it in hindsight, so obvious, that how powerful the feedback can be, and how you can really celebrate that even the littlest things or any conversation can create these breakthroughs that can have massive changes for the satisfaction, productivity of the teachers and students using our products.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Can I piggyback off that? Okay, I love hearing that story. And so I'm thinking through my own piece because for us, as you know, Access 3 came about, there were many different types and versions prior to that, right? And that piece of you have an idea and you go to the development team, for example, and they're like, oh yeah, we could do that in 2 hours. And you're like, what? And you turn to the Access 3 educator, and that is such a high impact. So low effort for such a high impact, like gives me goosebumps under my sweater today, because it's that piece of that, that ability to save that time for them. But then also on our side, that still is like internally being able to do those things and then start to prioritize and capitalize on those. So you start to think through what is low effort but for high impact, or maybe high effort but it's still going to be, is it still that high impact for that person ultimately, knowing that my full team and division always thinks of the end user and what they're doing. Yeah.
So when we come from a customer success thought process with your question here, one more story. The implementation that comes to mind where we are working with a school district, we have an add-on service on top of our technology, right? So we have a new teacher experience where we have our content that is in a scope and sequence aligned to really helping a tier 1 or a new special educator really ramp up and get those skills that they need in that moment, bite size, mini modules, etc. And so they had this purchase, this add-on service, so we were looking at how to implement it. And here's the feedback part. The director was kind of, Sarah, what are you not asking? What, tell me more. And it was a moment of, well, can we call it Access 3 Academy instead of New Teacher Experience? And I about fell out of my chair, because think of the psychology in that moment. They're now saying, we love what you're doing. We like your product, and we want to ingratiate it so deeply into our school culture that we want to call it a thing that we want to call it, and we want to launch it to our teachers and do that. And that's the ultimate product placement. That's the ultimate compliment back to us, that they trust us to just use our thing that we built into their world, and they'll let us know how it went. And so that's the story that's in my mind right now.
What excited me about that too was that they were like, well, it won't just be new teachers. Like, this is for everyone, right? Which kind of brings me, the teacher in me,
which is
it's like,
feedback as well.
what's good for some students sometimes is good for all students, right? It's our teachers as learners.
Yeah, so I mean, that the equity in that moment was powerful, and immediate internal feedback to everybody too, of like, hey, this just happened. This is important for us to remember, that we're not just bound to what we think is the right time for something, what we think is the ideal. Very powerful connection, collaborative spot.
So I have one final question. Ooh, keeps going in and out. One final question for the three of you. Again, from the seats that you sit in. If I am just starting out, maybe I have a startup of just myself or a couple of people. I don't have a marketing team. I don't have a product team, right? I'm there. Where do I start? And what should I expect to be a challenge?
I'm holding the mic, so I'm gonna answer. What immediately comes to mind is the word renewal, right? So not just the first sale, but what does it take to have them be a customer past that? And I'm selfish because I'm representing customer success here, but it's the idea of what has to happen in order for that customer to be in that deepest collaborative spot, that equity that's gained, that trust that's there. So it's a no-brainer when it comes time to have that renewal conversation or plan for next year or whatever your sales cycle looks like. To me, the renewal piece is tied in, and what from customer success, what kind of support is needed to make sure that they feel valued and connected to.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think that that any feedback is valuable feedback, right? So yes, we're a larger company and we have the ability to do a 50 customer listening tour, but I've also received extreme loss.
I just imagine you guys.
It was minivan. Not quite as exciting as a house, but I've also gotten some of the best feedback and the most honest and critical feedback from my own kids, from being able to sit down with my wife and say, like, hey, does this make sense to you? So you can get feedback from anywhere, regardless of who's there, theoretically an expert in the area or theoretically one of your core users. Just being able to sit down and explain to somebody how you're approaching something, what it looks like, that feedback, is always accessible. A neighbor, family member, and can also be extremely powerful. So I think you can start anywhere. It doesn't have to be a big formal study. It doesn't have to be someone in your market or even one of your direct customers. That feedback's available everywhere. It should be used and welcomed at all times.
All right. I would say I'm gonna kind of go full circle actually here. I would say looking at what is the problem that you're looking to solve for that person. So if you're just starting out and it's just me and I want to go out and do fill in the blank, I need to know what that is and why I'm doing it. And so really starting to identify that piece and what the value is of that. So really focusing on that problem and what value that's going to come from it, and how you do it obviously is the fun part of solving for it.
So when I think about the first year of Creatively Focused, it was myself and one other person. And in that year, all I did was listen. And I say that very simply. I asked questions and I listened and I said a lot of tell me more. And I wrote it down and wrote it down and wrote it down. And then I was able to take that information, and the researcher in me, from doing that before becoming a teacher, was able to identify those trends. And what that did for me, quite literally, was tell me what my strategy was for the next year of development. And then I found out that it didn't have to be much harder than that. As long as I had other people on my team who understood that listening was critical for us to be able to make our next decision about where our company was headed, that we could do great things. So the last part I'm going to come back to is, what is the challenge? From the CEO founder lens, my challenge was I wanted to do it all. I heard feedback in every area. I heard ideas of things that could happen. And I thought we could go this way and this way and this way, and where do I focus? And I'm not really going to provide you with a solution to that, because I can tell you that's also kind of the wonderful part about being a visionary or being a founder, is that you can let your brain do that. The challenge that I found is that until I had the people around me who could help me to prioritize and focus what truly was high impact, low effort, I found myself in wanting to develop all of these ideas. And so while that is a great thing to be able to do, it's also an extreme challenge. What are some of those other challenges that maybe any of the three of you can think of that a founder or a smaller startup may face?
Having the money to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a lot of challenges for that, and we worked through. I think you have to be okay with not failing, but utilizing and learning from anything you try, right? And not being afraid to try, knowing it won't be perfect. the first time, right? But knowing how you can continue to make progress.
Yeah, I think another thing too is, you love your existing customers and you always want to please them. But I was at a product conference a few years ago, and one of the statements that one of the speakers said that really stuck out with me was that you need to build for the customers you want to get, not just the customers you have. You can really easily get in this cycle of being so in tune with the feedback of the current customers, not actually looking forward to the customers you want to go get and the type of customers you want to have. And that can have a really detrimental impact on kind of the lifecycle of your product. So I think that's another, it's almost like taking that feedback and then using that too much into account, thinking forward beyond your existing customer base as well.
I heard a statement once about that was essentially listening too much to current customer feedback can kill innovation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I
And
think that's
and I think when you hear that, you're like, yep, because you get in the cycle of we need to listen, we need to listen, we need to listen. But if you're only relying on that customer feedback for what happens next, that's where that innovation starts to kind of crumble within your organization, because ultimately your team and your company and where you're headed is building for that next step ahead. And your users or your customers won't always know exactly what that next step looks like. So I love that.
Yes, well, they think they know.
They sure do, yes.
And they're free with their opinions, right? So as an education consultant for the last several years, I have heard a lot of amazing ideas from our customers, or the what ifs, or man, if it only did X, right? So being aware of what might impact would be a really decent idea, but how far does it deviate from the roadmap as well, right? And I come to conversations all jazzed up about X and Y because I share a similar brain as Elizabeth, but having the right people in product going, yeah, yep, but maybe we need to do these things first in order for that to become a reality as well. So we have a saying in our house is pick it and stick it, right? So picking it and sticking it, being aware of the feedback, and making sure you're not swayed too far off from maybe your original mission and the problem that you've thought about trying to solve, and not being everything for everyone. That's a mile wide, inch deep. I squeezed in another little metaphor there. So.
Full of those. So I'm going to turn it to the audience. What are you still wondering about? What are some of those questions that you had earlier? We have an excellent panel of people here to be able to answer some of your questions, and we're happy to speak to our experiences as well as, different things that we've learned along the way. What's something that you're wondering about still?
So, there's a mic, so I'll yell loud. First thing, your last point, I always go back to the Henry Ford quote. If I would have built what the customer wanted, it would have been a faster horse, right? So I appreciate that, and that's a startup mentality, right? But you were talking about feedback and all the good feedback. Tell me how you use the negative feedback, and for a startup, how you should appreciate that, because not everyone gives it, right? How do you guys handle negative feedback?
Can you jump out? I have a story with
Sure. Yeah. I mean, typically when I get pulled into conversations by, a sales team member, a customer success team member, it's not often because, oh, this customer loves us to death. They just want to tell you so much how much they love us. It's usually something's not working great, or they have some feedback. And, I think there's an element of, working with the customer and making sure they're calm, but then truly listening, because if it's something that's invoking that much of a response, if it's invoking that much of a need to explain the feedback, that there is value in there, right? And a lot of times it's easy to get defensive about that. It's easy to try to rationalize it as the customer is just not thinking about it right, or they're not using the product as we designed it. A lot of ways to explain it away. And so again, I think it's like we've talked about in a couple different contexts. How do you step back and be objective, to your point, really understand what they're trying to say and find the value out of it, because it's easy to discount it in those situations. And so again, I think it just takes that conscious effort to know that you need to be objective, that you need to look at. And it isn't always, right? I mean, sometimes it isn't great feedback that you're not going to put in place, but a lot of times it is that somewhere under there, if you can get to the real core of the issue, that there's something to learn from it.
I'm going to use a quote from somebody in the back here who says, customers are okay if something is broken or mistakes happen. It's what you do about it and how you fix it. And so it is that action of that you're taking. The feedback is there, so listening and then doing everything you can to have them feel like they've been heard. And like Paul said, sometimes that feedback is them just needing to say mean things to you because they're upset, right, or whatever. But what you do about it then is super important.
Does being heard always mean something changing? I'm going to have Becky answer.
No, I don't think it always means that, depending on finding really, like you go to those core pieces, right? You're asking the questions and they're feeling heard and you can take that away. I view that kind of constructive criticism as like, yes, they're in there. Like, yes, like that's what I need. There's only so much we can build until we have them in there. So I appreciate the question because that then turns into, okay, let's problem solve. And sometimes the current solution is not a change. Sometimes it is a change and it's a refinement that is even better, but they're just in there and it's like, I love it.
Sometimes it's just not yet, right? I think the hardest place you can be in is when you get the negative kind of feedback. You know that maybe 6 months down the road here, that will look different for that person, but maybe you're not in a position to be able to say that with confidence yet. And so, yeah, or out loud, period. And so I come from a family of salespeople, and every conversation I find comes back to some kind of sales strategy where, like, in my mind, it goes back to that building the relationship, building the rapport, right? Again, how do you help them to continue to feel heard? How do you help them understand their value and how critical they are to the continued success of what you're doing and how it is helping them? You know, to your point, Paul, we had a long period of time where we had to kind of handle the objection of, well, we want it to do this because this is how you used to work, or this is how it's worked for us. And maybe they're just not there yet in terms of the trust of how it will work next. But I think that the very real part of that also is acknowledging you may be doing something for tomorrow's customer that may not be so pleasing to today's customer, right? And so being able to kind of understand that relationship and where you're at with that customer, and quite frankly, where that customer ends up for you in the future, because I know our customers in year 1, 2, and 3 are very different from what they are now. And so I think that negative feedback piece is you're doing something right if you're hearing that. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Yeah, Joe.
How do you handle the issue where the customer who's buying your product, the school administrator, is not the one that's using your product? So the one you're listening to isn't the one who's actually signing the contract.
That is every day of my life. So the goal there is to really get to the why. And when we really think about that usage, the goal of how that teacher has adjusted their day to leverage our product, I ask that and I make sure that there's a plan. And our implementation strategy, we have a solutioning phase where we are asking a lot of questions in different ways to get to that very thing of, okay, if I'm asking a teacher to use the timeline feature for due process, what are they currently doing? How do we adjust that? What does the change management behavior look like, or the behavior change look like? And how long do you think that will take? And who's going to be more open to it today? And who's going to take a year to get there? And use those strategies. So helping that person initially understand that this isn't a buy it, we don't talk about it once, teach them how to log in and move on. this is a bigger lift, different lift than maybe they've seen before. And that's just specific to our system with Access 3, but I know it's a strategy I've seen and leveraged at other companies too. So,
Oh, just, I would also add that you also show that benefit for the buyer as well as who it's. So for administration, I would say that piece of what will be the impact and outcome for them, just as much as maybe the core user, the educator.
One concrete thing I just thought about was one administrator said to us in the very first meeting, I get hundreds of emails a day and I just feel like I can never get back to them. Now that administrator is not active on our software, but within 2 weeks of implementing across the district, they said to us, I'm already receiving less emails. And that was that kind of indirect impact that I think we also need to keep reminding that person of, right? Like she said it was only 2 weeks in, and you better believe that one, we use that. That's a huge, huge impact on a school administrator. But beyond that, she's going to hear about that again. At some point, Daryl's probably going to say, hey, are you still receiving less emails? What does it look like for you now? Right. And so I think being able to pinpoint, and it was just an off the cuff comment in the first conversation, right? But even just in that conversation, flagging it right away to say like, that's the part that's kind of pushing them, or that's their why to this, right? They need to be able to do something else. And so part of the questions that we asked quite a bit of in the beginning to the administrator, who is not the direct user, is if this works in this way for you, what does that mean for you, right? If this works in this way and the teachers are utilizing it, what impact will that have on you? Okay, it will save you time. What are you going to do with that new time that you have, right? And so helping them kind of paint the picture in their head of what life could look like, and then being able to come back to that and to be able to high five and say, hey, life looks like this now. This is where we've gotten. That helps that decision maker say yes over and over again.
that answer what you're asking?
Yes. Oh, so we actually don't do anything in terms of their internal email, but what happens in our scenario is that special education teachers frequently only have one administrator to email with their questions. And so a solution of our software that we have is that the special education teachers can actually ask within our software instead of having to go to their school administrator. So what happens is we build the capacity of that school administrator to be able to get in person to see the teachers more, to be able to do more of the work that is what I call high impact. And they in turn have less emails coming to them because their questions are being sent over to us on the end of the software. So they still will receive their same spam emails and all that. We don't touch their physical email, but what we do want to do is make sure that they're receiving less and less emails. So. Any other questions we can answer for you today? We've really appreciated the time here today. I hope that you're walking away with one thing that you're going to think about or do tomorrow. And so I am very big on, especially when I come to any type of training, like write the one thing down. What's the one thing that you took away from this conversation that you could take some action on tomorrow? What I love about feedback and listening to customers is that you quite literally could send an email right after this session that asks one direct question to get feedback from your customer and just see what they say. Start there. So thank you all to our panelists that we had here today, Becky, Paul, and Daryl. If you are interested in learning more about Edmentum or Creatively Focused, we have the information here. You can also go ahead and follow our Creatively Focused journey. I once came to Twin Cities Startup Week not even really understanding that I was a startup. And here we are going into national sales with our product Access 3 to help support the retention of special educators. I really appreciate all the support I've received from the Twin Cities Startup community and happy to be here today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your experience through the week. Thank you, everybody.